Begins in just minutes, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome to the second hour of the Alex Jones Show. Mike Adams filling in for Alex today, but he will be joining us in approximately 25 minutes with some announcements about Bilderberg. So that's going to be interesting. He's got some major announcements to make, and between now and then, we continue to be joined by Arnie Gundersen, nuclear industry expert, an outspoken scientist. I don't know if outspoken is the right word, just somebody who's willing to tell the truth, you know, which is so rare today that it almost seems extraordinary. But it is just someone willing to tell the truth. He continues with us. Arnie, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. So in the last segment, we talked about how the amount of radiation released from Fukushima has already vastly exceeded the amount released from Chernobyl and that catastrophic accident in Ukraine. But what about the amount of energy contained in these partially spent fuel rods that could conceivably burn? Is there any estimation of how much energy is in that fuel compared to Chernobyl?
Oh, that would be 20 times Chernobyl, I'm sure. You know, so suddenly that 85 doesn't look too unrealistic when you start looking at any single fuel pool. You know, I said earlier, you know, everybody's focused on Unit 4, and rightfully so. But Unit 3 had a more severe explosion and is likely structurally weakened even more than Unit 4. And the Unit 3 pool has about half as much nuclear fuel as the Unit 4 pool. So it's not clear to me that Unit 3 is a whole heck of a lot better.
What is the thinking behind this idea of whoever engineered these nuclear power plants? And I know U.S. corporations, I think General Electric was part of the key designer. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But what is this idea of let's store nuclear fuel 30 meters above the ground in a pool? Why not always store it at ground level or underground, even on site?
That's a great question. I asked that question 40 years ago when I started my career. And at the time, they don't do that anymore. It's just this Mark I reactor and a few Mark IIs that do that. All the other boiling water reactors, the Mark IIIs, and all the other pressurized water reactors do store it down low. At the time this thing was designed, you got to remember, this was designed in the mid-'60s. They were afraid that if they opened gates and the fuel pool was lower than the nuclear reactor, they could drain the nuclear reactor. So if they put the pool on the same elevation as the reactor, that wouldn't happen. So there was a logic behind it, but then they basically developed a better fuel transfer mechanism that doesn't happen.
I see.
You know, you can get this fuel out of these pools. The technology's there. There's dry cask storage is available, and there were dry casks at Fukushima. They all survived the tsunami just fine. In the U.S., we could take all of our fuel pools that are totally overcrowded and put them on the ground. But the problem is the NRC is letting the utilities that own them get away with it because they don't want to spend the money.
Well, of course. Isn't it always about saving money, even if they put the population at risk? And that's the sad part about this. But if you get back to the 1960s, when this was being designed, is this a Mark I facility or a Mark II?
This is a Mark I.
Mark I. Certainly in the 1960s, the scientists at that time must have known that Japan, that whole region, was geologically extremely active. That's not a big secret even in the 1960s. How could they? I'm not accusing you. Obviously, you didn't put it there, but I'm asking you to try to help us understand what kind of weird thinking went on. How could they even place a nuclear facility right on the coast where it would be hit by a tsunami? 10 seconds and we got to go to break. Okay. And we'll answer it on the other side.
Okay, great.
Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to set you up like that, Arnie. My timing mistake there. But we'll be back with an answer to that question and much more straight ahead on The Alex Jones Show. This is Mike Adams filling in. Stay with us. A lot more straight ahead. We'll be right back. Hope you're enjoying our conversation on this amazing Friday. Amazing being how amazing is it what's happening in our world and the lack of a reasonable reaction to it. We've got a Fukushima situation that quite literally threatens life as we know it in the Northern Hemisphere. It doesn't mean it would instantly kill us all, but it could unleash radiation that could kill us slowly. It's the big slow kill. situation. It could contaminate our food supply for literally centuries if the worst case happens. So we want to prevent that. We want to solve this problem. And just before the break, Arnie Gundersen from Fairewinds.com, who is probably, arguably, the most respected expert who's speaking out on this issue, he said that we have the technology to remove the fuel from these precarious fuel pools and put them in a safer storage location. So my question to you, Arnie, and thank you for your continued time with us here. I know you're extremely busy, and I really honor your time here on the show. Why isn't the international community, and the U.S. in particular, on all hands on deck, red alert, let's go over there and solve this problem immediately and eliminate this danger now?
My one-word answer is money. And it's not. We didn't have to wait for Fukushima to know that a problem of this nature was looking over our shoulder. There have been experts out there saying it for years, myself included. There's this stuff called dry cask storage, where after the fuel's about 3 or 4 years old, it can be cooled in air, and so it gets put in these casks. It's still hotter than a pistol from a radiation standpoint, but the physical heat is down. They put them in these huge casks that weigh 100 or more tons, and they set them on the ground. And until we get a long-term storage solution, the best place is out of those pools and on the ground. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is playing games with this, and they're saying, well, we need to consider all of the costs as well as the benefit of getting it out of the pool.
But wait a minute, let me interrupt you there, and I apologize, Arnie, but when they needed to bail out Goldman Sachs, they came up with the money. They just created $1 trillion out of nothing, and they bailed out the banks. So how is it that saving the banks is more important than saving humanity, potentially? I mean, does the NRC, does the U.S. government not understand scale of dangers? I don't get this. Why are the banks more important than saving humanity?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the money's there. It's not like, for the banks, we had to create the money, sort of. But there's a $27 billion fund for long-term storage. Now, that's set aside for looking for geological storage and things like that. But we could use that fund. So we have been putting in 1/10 of a penny per kilowatt of nuclear power we use for years and years and years. And so this fund has developed over $20 billion. We could use that fund to put all these fuel pools into dry cask storage, and this problem would be solved, both from a terrorism standpoint as well as from an act of God, like at Fukushima. This is solvable.
What kind of time frame? If the money were made available today, let's say if the Federal Reserve actually wanted to solve this problem, and they went into their little computer and they typed in some digits and created another $1 trillion, like they did every time they wanted to bail out Wall Street. If that money were available, what are we talking in terms of total cleanup? Like 10 weeks, longer, 6 months? What do you think it is?
You just have to fabricate the containers, and it would probably take a year or two to fabricate enough containers. So, certainly within 3 years, it's solvable. And it doesn't even take an act of Congress or the Federal Reserve. It just takes the Nuclear Regulatory Commission saying, do it.
But if you say 2 or 3 years to create these containers, but in that time frame, then between now and the time that this is solved, an earthquake, you said a 7 or a 7.5 magnitude earthquake with an epicenter near Fukushima could bring this pool down before the problem is solved, and thereby unleash this massive amount of radiation. It seems like we are at risk for this time period, and the government the NRC hasn't even announced that it's going to take these steps to solve it. So we could be facing this risk for a decade, couldn't we?
Well, there's two questions there. One, what I was talking about is in the U.S. we could solve this in 3 years and just pray there's no earthquake. In Fukushima, I was on Chris Martenson a year ago, and I explained how you could solve this problem, which was to build a building outside the building to lift the nuclear fuel out. And just last week, Tokyo Electric said, we're going to build a building around the building. They are taking way too long to solve this problem because of exactly the concerns that, another earthquake could come. But
so it seems like we are being smothered by red tape here. We are it's like humanity is hanging on the edge of a cliff by our fingernails, figuratively speaking. This radiation of release could happen at any moment if Mother Nature, if an earthquake takes place. And yet governments everywhere, Japan and the U.S. in particular, are dragging their feet on this and doing nothing. They're not taking responsibility. They're not even serving the interests of the people that they claim to represent. This is pathetic. This is sad, because it's a case of almost another democide, death by government if the worst case happens.
Well, I think it's death by the nuclear industry deeply infused into government. This is the regulator. The Japanese have a great word for it. When people working for the regulator go to work at a high level and well-paying jobs at the utility, they call it ascent into heaven. So there's this coziness, and it's with the IAEA, who I've seen papers say that they're a watchdog. In fact, Article 2 of their charter says their goal is to promote nuclear power. So the industry and the government are essentially one, no matter where you go. The Prime Minister of Japan now was the finance minister during the accident, and one of his emails surfaced about a month ago, and it said it was from 3 weeks after the accident, and he said, whatever you do not affect TEPCO. So,
wow.
They've been more interested in protecting TEPCO and their own bureaucratic butts than they have been about protecting the people of Japan.
Well, what's new? And what government body or department doesn't want to cover its own butt? Or in the case of the ATF or the DEA in America, they actually create problems so they get bigger budgets and become more powerful. The CDC did that. The FBI does that, running these false terror events, but that's a different topic. Let me ask you this. I noticed that the general public has a very poor understanding of what I would call relative risk. I was trained as in a scientific way as an engineer, very strong background in mathematics, and I often think about the relative risk of events. A lot of people are concerned about, let's say, Yellowstone exploding. Well, that happens once every 600,000 years. Or they're concerned about a comet or an asteroid hitting the planet. That's possible, but in terms of relative risk, the Fukushima event is here now. It is orders of magnitude more likely than many of these other concerns that tend to dominate people's psychological focus. Can you speak to this issue of relative risk and having an appropriate perception of what risks really exist?
I have a saying, sooner or later in any foolproof system, the fools are going to exceed the proofs. And I think that's we fooled ourselves at Fukushima, we as the world, and essentially this concept is for any reactor. But let's look at Fukushima. We knew we could build a power plant that could withstand a Richter 7 and a 3-meter, a 9-foot tsunami. So that's what we built. And we fooled ourselves into thinking that that's what Mother Nature was going to give us, a 7 Richter, 3-foot, a 3-meter tsunami. The economics to build a plant to withstand a Richter 8 or a 60-foot tsunami would have made it so you wouldn't have built that nuclear plant. You couldn't have afforded to build that nuclear plant. So I think that in the back of the people's minds who are advocates of the technology, they convince themselves that Mother Nature is going to be benign. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just laughing. Keep going, because they're so wrong. Mother Nature always gives you, it hands you something that's completely unanticipated. In fact, you cannot even imagine the human mind. Even a brilliant nuclear engineer, nuclear physicist, cannot accurately anticipate the unexpected nature of Mother Nature.
Yeah, my journey has been from pro-nuclear senior vice president, and then I got to the point when I blew the whistle and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission took bribes and deliberately botched the inspection. I still believed in the technology, but I didn't believe in government. And now, the Fukushima accident has pushed me over it, and I'm at a point where, just like what you said, I don't believe that mankind can build something strong enough that Mother Nature can't knock it down. And considering the consequences, it's not just the risk.